Hello, everybody, and welcome back to 50 Shades of Tay. I am your host, Taylor Gonzalez, and today I am joined by a very special guest. I have Tom Jolliffe here, who is a writer, a producer, an actor, and he currently wrote the upcoming Cinderella's Revenge. Tom, how are you doing today?
I'm very good, Taylor. Very good. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, no, I've been looking forward to it.
Oh, great. Thank you. So have I. You know what's funny? So when I was doing some research, there's currently two Cinderella horror films that are about to come out. You have yours, which
Yeah.
is Cinderella's Revenge, and then there's also Cinderella's Curse. But you know what's funny is that both of them have Peter Watson in them.
Yeah, there's another guy also called Mike Kelson, I believe, is in both of them as well.
Oh, really? I didn't catch that one.
Yeah.
Oh,
But
that's awesome.
everyone kind of knows each other who's worked on both films.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I'm very excited for both of them. So in Cinderella, Cinderella gets granted a wish by her fairy godmother. If you could have your fairy godmother grant you any wish, what would you wish for?
Well, it sounds painfully obvious, but a large bank account wouldn't go amiss. At least pay off my mortgage. That'll do me.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah.
Yeah.
So other than Cinderella, did you have any other favorite fairy tales when you were growing up?
Yeah, I guess I kind of liked all the sort of the grim fairy tales and things like that. Um, Alice in Wonderland is another one that I quite like. Uh I'm doing kind of two at the moment. I'm doing one which I'm working on for someone else, and then I've got my own kind of slight variation on that, which is kind of like a mix of that, based a little bit on my own career as well.
Oh, that's
Um,
great.
yeah, so yeah, probably something like Alice in Wonderland. And also I liked Labyrinth as well. That was a big favorite of mine growing up. And obviously
Okay.
that's got, massive inspiration from Alice in Wonderland and a few other things like that. Um, yeah, I'd probably say, yeah, that one probably.
Nice, nice. Yeah, there's so many fun fairy tales out there, and then to see them now getting twisted into these horror
Yeah.
stories, it's just so fun because I don't know, there's something about the fairy tale element that really lends itself well to horror.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, especially with sort of stuff like the Grimms and Cinderella as well. The original stories were quite dark and
Mhm,
twisted anyway, so it's almost come full circle. I think everyone's so associated with the Disney versions,
mhm.
aren't they? So yeah, that's kind of what they think of first, without necessarily having read, the original Grimm fairy tales or anything like that.
Mhm. So what would you say was the most challenging part of writing this film?
I think it was kind of finding a balance really, because obviously we had the established story, and it was one of the challenges as well is to keep everything as far away from the Disney version as possible. I think Scott Chambers probably had this in mind, and Reese as well, with Winnie the Pooh, that you can't have any kind of crossovers with the Disney version or anything that might be something that Disney created. So we had to be wary of that. Um, and also because our one, where it might differ probably from Louisa's, is well, there's a lot of comedy in Cinderella's Revenge as well. So it's just finding that balance of how much comedy you can put in, and how balancing it with how kind of dark you go as well with the horror moments.
Yeah, that's great. How did you get into screenwriting?
I think mostly it started with just loving films, really.
Mm,
Um, I'd always kind of tinkered around with writing little scripts here and there. And then I started kind of doing film reviews as well. Because I work as a film journalist as well. So I do sort of film features and articles, things like that. So maybe 10 years ago, I started thinking a bit more seriously about writing films. I started off in short films and kind of tried to work my way up into features. And then actually, it was Louisa Warren
mhm.
who gave me my first feature. So I worked with her a few times. Yeah. And then as soon as I did the first feature, it kind of snowballed from there. But yeah, I just love writing. I love writing about films. I love writing films. So it was just all kind of from there, really.
Oh, that's great. What was the first film that you worked on with Louisa?
It was a film we'd started off on something else called Cyber Bride, and that kind of got shelved for a little bit. And then so while that was kind of like in the wings, she said, "Oh, do you want to write a horror film about a scarecrow versus Vikings?" And that was Scarecrow's Revenge.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then ironically, I think one of the Terminator films, I think it was Terminator Genesis.
Mm.
It was that one or Dark Fate. No, it might have been Dark Fate, actually, the last one. But that came out, and then it kind of like triggered the distributors into thinking about that films along that line, and they went back to the original one we were working on, which was Cyber Bride. So yeah, that one came out just after that as well.
Oh, that's fun. So, do you have in your mind a example of a perfectly written film? It doesn't necessarily have to be the best acted or, the best CGI, but just like the way it's written. Is there an example in your mind?
I think probably one of my favorites is a comedy called With Nail and I,
Okay.
which is it's very, very kind of like British. It's just it's this film that shouldn't really work, but it somehow does. Just sometimes a film kind of goes against what a distributor might tell you, or like screenwriting manuals tell you you should have a film like, but it just seems to work so brilliantly.
Mhm.
So it's a kind of like bittersweet comedy, kind of strange and farcical at times, but basically two out of work actors just go off on holiday. A few sort of strange things happen involving one of their uncles. And that's kind of like, and then they come back and that's kind of it. But it's also it's got layers underneath it as well, and quite bittersweet as well at times. But I think Colin Farrell's also a fan, and he put it perfectly. I think he said there's not a wasted word in the film.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so yeah, that's one which I really like. It's just almost like somehow or other, some films manage to do this, but almost every line is quotable.
Oh, that's awesome.
For the Brits anyway. I mean, some of the humor might not translate so well in America, but I think there are still some, quite a lot of American fans as well.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I'll have to add that to my list because that sounds fun. Yeah, any
Yeah.
movie where it has all these quotable lines, I love that.
Yeah. And then something like Big Lebowski is quite similar. That's probably the American equivalent, really.
Okay, okay, that's a good
Yeah.
idea to, yeah, have an equivalent. Okay. What about horror specifically? Is there a horror film that you think is just perfectly written?
Um, in terms of sort of the writing, I guess, I mean, one my favorite horror film is The Shining.
Okay.
And that's another one that almost, it almost shouldn't work the way it's
Mhm.
kind of it's made, but because it's Kubrick and he's so sort of single-minded in what he wants, and everything that's on screen is, there's nothing there that's by accident with someone like Stanley Kubrick. So I've always loved that, and it's just like the atmosphere of it, the way it's shot.
Mhm.
Um, and again, it's got these kind of layers in it. I think there's certain layers that people have kind of like attributed to the film a bit more than what's actually there.
Mhm.
There's so many sort of wild theories about what the film's really about, and things that are in there, like
Mhm.
relating to being a confessional about Kubrick faking the moon landings and things like that. So probably not quite that much, but yeah, I've always really liked that one.
Nice. Yeah, that's a great answer. I love The Shining. I think the last time I
Yeah,
watched it was on Easter, which is like so random, but it
yeah.
was playing on the TV at my friend's house and I was like, "Oh, it's Easter. Might as well watch The Shining." I know it doesn't pair well, but it was fun. So what is your favorite aspect of writing?
I think it's just the ability to be able to do kind of anything really. In terms of what I've been doing at the moment, I've been so from the first kind of commissioned screenplay I did with Louisa, it's almost been non-stop since. Um, and I've just done so many different films and kind of archetypes and genres. I've covered almost everything, and I just really like. I'm quite eclectic in my taste with films anyway, and it's the same with what I write. I kind of like to do well, I quite fancy doing something that's a little bit in the vein of this or something in the vein of that. Um, yeah, I love doing, films of all types and just really kind of going from two wildly different sides of the spectrum between films.
Is there a type of film that you have not written yet, like a musical or a romantic comedy? Is there something that you haven't explored yet that you're interested in?
Um, I've not written a musical yet. I don't know whether I'd be quite interested in doing that. Yeah, I think so, but because I'm quite musical as well. But it would just depend. I would need to have like I think maybe a year or two off just to focus on it. I think for
Yeah.
something like that. But um, yeah, that would be something quite interesting to do. But I've still got so many other things that I can tick off first, I
Mhm.
think.
What about your least favorite aspect of writing? Is there something about writing that you just dread, or it's your least favorite thing, or you put it off to the very end?
Um, I think sometimes rewrites can be a challenge.
Mhm.
It's that process of kind of going back over and over again. Um, I do like, occasionally I'll get jobs where they'll come to me and they say they need a script in 2 weeks. Sometimes it's been a week, and then that's it. I hand it off. That's me done. Um, Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. So, Cinderella's Revenge. That was quite a new process for me. That one took about 7 or 8 months in the script process. And then the first kind of notes meeting I had was there was a Zoom meeting and there was about 7 or 8 other people on board at the meeting. So that was quite an eye opener because then everyone's got all different ideas.
Mhm.
They might not necessarily mesh together, but actually I found that process quite interesting and enjoyable. So yeah, probably the rewriting process is quite difficult. Um, yeah, sometimes if you feel like you've done something before, that can also be a challenge because you're trying to think of ways to freshen it up and then
Mhm.
kind of stick to your remit as well. Because sometimes distributor will want something that's quite, I guess, formulaic because they trust in like a certain formula that they know that works.
All right, all right. So rewrites and just yeah, I guess I don't know how well I would do with that. Having especially when you think of bigger budget films, the more I think the higher the budget, the more people
Yeah,
have a say and more people like want to have their ideas in there. So I don't know how I would do with that, but
yeah.
do you
I
think
can
that
imagine. I don't know if I'd be able to handle the sort of, let's say, like the Disney way of doing it. Because I'd be kind of back and forth having all these meetings constantly, and then there would get to a point where I'd get replaced or
hmm,
gets handed off to someone else. So yeah, that would be quite challenging as well if the project got handed off to someone else.
mhm. Oh, yeah. Do you think because right now, Star Wars and Marvel, mainly Disney, is like under fire for the writing maybe isn't as strong on their Marvel series and movies as it used to be. Do you think it's because the budget is so big, there's more people invested financially in the success of these films, these movies, that more people have a say and more people are trying to put their ideas in there, and there's more, I guess, studio interference in these huge, big blockbusters than there is in something that's more indie. Do you think that's part of why the writing is suffering in some people's opinions?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's difficult because so many people they've got an input into something that costs 250 million pound, and then I guess you might get there's a certain amount of ego perhaps from maybe some executives that want a creative input. So they're giving their ideas. Then you've got someone who's probably maybe a bit more level-headed thinking, and they're thinking purely on a market sort of focus, and they're thinking, well, this is what we know audiences want. They might be kind of misguided in that. And it seems to have worked out that way that they think maybe audiences want this, but it doesn't necessarily ring true. So yeah, there's I guess too many cooks spoil the broth, as they say.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But so you find like with the indie horror that you're currently working on that you have more freedom and more creative control over what you're writing. I know there's still meetings with other people on Zoom, but you feel like you have more of a creative control over something with a huge budget like Marvel.
I would imagine so, yeah. I mean, the Marvel paychecks would be nice, but I just think,
Yes.
yeah. And obviously, even then, things change wildly in post. I think,
Mm,
with Aquaman 2, for example, there were so many issues with like Amber Heard and then the certain things not working in the film. So you've had this happens quite a lot in Marvel, that it seems to be a lot of films that get have a lot of reshoots, or there's a lot of visual effects that need putting in, and by the time everything's been mixed together, it's already been chopped and changed a lot in the script, and then it gets chopped and changed during the shoot and the editing. And some of these things just come out a bit messy.
mm,
And again, I don't know why this is a modern trend in sort of blockbusters, but everything's like 2.5, 3 hours. So it's difficult to get something kind of, I guess, refined and like clean and tidy at that kind of runtime
mm.
at the best of times without all those kind of interferences.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's crazy. I'm thinking specifically like of Madam Web, which just came out. That
Yeah,
one, especially hearing the stars like Dakota Johnson talking about how when she signed on for the project, it was one thing, but then
yeah.
just like you said, like the writing changes, then the edits change, then other people come in and they have their. It's just crazy that you could sign up for one film and think you know what the story is and what you're doing, and then it just comes out completely different. It's
Yeah,
nuts.
I mean, I've had that to an extent in some films but it gets to kind of like because the budgets are lower as well, there's less room for kind of error. So,
Mm,
you know, you, even if the idea changes at the start of the writing process to the end, um, so for Cinderella, for example, we probably dialed back the comedy side of it between the start and, toward the end. Uh, but by the time you get the final script, it's almost kind of there and locked in because
mm,
there's no room for sort of having being able to change things last minute, or
mm,
if you get halfway through a shoot, you can't suddenly think, well, we don't really need that character, or we need to put another character in, because reshoots cost a lot of money, and
mm.
to Disney it's okay, but to an indie filmmaker it's quite difficult.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. So for people who are watching this that might be interested in becoming a screenwriter or working on film, do you have some advice for them?
Yeah, I think networking is really important. um if you start, if you kind of like work your way up incrementally, it helps as well. So, like for me, I started doing short films. Um, when I was first starting out as a writer and I was trying to hand off scripts to people or get interest in scripts, sometimes I would be giving sort of short scripts off to people for nothing. And the films just went dead, or they just didn't get made. So I ended up producing my first couple of short films. That is kind of a thing that many writers have to do, where you take a bit more control and kind of produce something yourself. But then, you have a vested interest and you have control over how it turns out.
Mhm.
Um, it also means you can't blame anyone else if it turns out bad. But
Oh.
I've been quite lucky on that front with the stuff I've produced.
Mm,
Yeah, so do that networking, because like for example, for me, someone who works in the UK industry, I know Louisa, I know
mhm.
Scott Chambers, I've worked with Reese a lot of times. I've worked with Nikki a couple of times, who
Oh.
you interviewed the other day. Um, everyone kind of knows everyone, everyone's worked with, everyone else.
Mm,
It's like it's a bit of a spider's web, but not a very big web.
mm.
Um, So yeah, networking is good. And then, just by association, I've ended up getting jobs and recommended. So that's always a good way. And
Mm.
obviously the other most important thing is do your job well and also be good to work with.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
Because, reputations do precede people. So
Mhm.
yeah, you don't want to get yourself a reputation for being hard to work with.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, that's true. So for people who are interested in keeping up with your upcoming films, your upcoming projects, where would be a good place to follow you?
I think probably Instagram is the best one. Um, Yeah, I post updates on most of my kind of like my upcoming stuff there. Yeah, so that's always a good one.
I will make sure to put a link to your Instagram in the description of this video so people can come and follow you and keep up with your upcoming projects. Thank you, Tom, so much for joining me. I really appreciate this, and I am so looking forward to Cinderella's Revenge next month, where, yeah, we're almost there.
Yep, April 26th, I believe, and I think they've already listed most of the territories where it's playing in the US. So yeah, I hope everyone enjoys it.
Very much looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tom. It was very nice to meet you.
Yep, you too. Thanks for having me on.
Have a great day.
You too, Taylor. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.